This is the Rocket City Retirement Show with Cris Wallace. Cris loves educating people in person and over the airwaves. Whether it's retirement planning, investing, tax, or legacy, Cris prides himself in helping protect what matters to you. This is the Rocket City Retirement Show.
Hi, I'm Luann Fulmer, and I want to welcome you to the Rocket City Retirement Show with my friend, certified financial planner, financial advisor, Cris Wallace. He's president of WG Financial Group. Then also joining us, Graham Bauer. He is a certified financial planner and a financial advisor at the firm. Both here again today to give you some really good advice about retirement planning. They are passionate about helping retirees like you, and we are going to get into some good stuff again today. So let's start off with the phone number that you need as we get started. 256-937-2010. That's how you can reach out to Cris for a complimentary visit. Okay. 256-937-2010. Call that number to get on their calendar or text the word visit if you like to text. You can do that as well. You can always find us on Facebook. Just look for WG Financial Group 256. And Cris will update it with any news information about retirement that happens throughout the week. Our motto is plan, retire, and play. And I love that. Find us online anytime at WGFinancialGroup.com. And remember to get this show wherever you get your podcast, Spotify, Apple, wherever. Just search for our show, Rocket City Retirement Show. Hello to you, Cris. Hello to you, Graham.
Hello, Luann.
Hey, Luann.
So great to be here with you guys today. Now, we have to kind of welcome Graham back, don't we?
We do, but I like how when you're intro in the show, you're like, my friend, Cris Wallace. It means a lot to me that you would call me a friend.
Aww.
Did you call me a friend?
And also my friend Graham Bauer.
Okay, I thought you did.
I wasn't sure, but...
I guess, okay, I'm Graham. You're my friend too. It just didn't come out.
No, I think it did, actually. I think it did.
And
we'll
my
have
friend
to
Graham Bauer.
listen
Okay.
to watch the instant replay on that one.
Yeah, we'll be sure and catch the show before it airs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll
No.
let you know if you still have a job next week.
Yeah, if I didn't say it, forgive me because I do mean it. You guys are both friends to me. And I love it. Love learning from you. We have a professional relationship, but yet we're friends too, right? Professional
We
friends.
are. On Tuesdays only, but yes.
Yes. Yeah, we never see each other throughout the rest of the week, but yeah, Tuesdays only. I love it.
Right.
Okay, so you guys have some really good stuff that you want to get into right off the top of the show here.
Yeah, we do. So today, Graham and I thought it'd be a good idea to throw some information together that would benefit a lot of people listening to the show today. We got two different topics we want to jump into. The first one is going to be more about order of operations, and I've told the story before. PEMDAS, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. We believe that there is an order of operations when it comes to saving money. So we want to talk a little bit about that. And then we're going to jump in on the tail end of segment one here. We're going to jump into the differences between a solo K and a SEP IRA, a solo K being a solo 401k and a SEP IRA. And we want to talk about the differences between the two because sometimes there are self-employed 1099 individuals out there, and we want to kind of educate them on the difference between the two and why one might be better or not as good as the other. So we want to talk about that. So as far as order of operations, before we jump into that, just as a rule of thumb, just as a reminder, and rules of thumb are just that. They're just rules of thumb. But we feel like if you're in a low bracket, you should be doing mostly Roth IRA money at that point. So,
okay.
And when I say low bracket, I mean the 12% or less, it should be without question would be Roth. And then there's the argument of how much into the 22 that you do Roth and then maybe switch to pre-tax, if at all, in some cases. And sometimes there's not a right answer because we truly don't know. We can make the assumption that tax rates are probably going to go up in the future, but we truly don't know exactly where they're going to be and will we be in a lower bracket when we retire. So, for sure, lower brackets we feel like is a good idea to look at Roth, and then up into that 22 at some point, probably Roth as well. So let's get into the order of our operations. So I'll kind of let Graham kick it off here. Just the very first thing that someone should do when we're looking at saving and investing for the future, what is a number one on our list that we kind of put together?
So number one on our list is not going to surprise a lot of people. It's the emergency fund, your cash liquid savings that you have in a bank account, a money market, something that's very easily accessible that you can get your hands on very quickly if you need it. And I think that the emergency fund, at least in my opinion, can be a little bit misunderstood sometimes because there's not many times in your life probably where you're going to have a one-time expense that actually costs, $15,000, $20,000, $30,000, but it does happen from time to time, especially if you're a homeowner. You could have an HVAC go out, you could have, the roof go down. There's all these things you can have, but especially if you're a homeowner. But I think to me, one of the crucial things for a young person and someone that's a pre-retiree is really to keep you out of more debt. I think that is maybe its greatest and best use. People that I see that don't have emergency funds are the most prone to get into debt, because if you don't have an emergency fund, so, if you have $2,000 in your bank account and then you have everything else or, not much else other places, doesn't matter, and your roof goes out and it's $20,000, what are you going to do? I mean, you pretty much have to finance that, right? There's not much. There might be some other options with a 401k loan or something like that. Doesn't matter. It's still going into a little bit of debt, even if you're debt to yourself, to fund something like that. Same thing, if that happens and your car totally goes out and you got to buy a new car. So there's things that happen where I think a lot of people think of it as, just if you lose your job. And that's a good reason to have an emergency fund too. That's still a very good reason to have one. Don't get me wrong. But I think that there's other reasons too as well. So I think one thing, especially when I see someone who gets in a credit card cycle where they always have a balance year over year, a really good way to combat that, I think, is having an emergency fund. Even just so, if you have $15,000 in savings and you're going on a vacation, you don't end up putting an extra $3,000-$4,000 on a credit card. Because that stuff adds up. And even if it feels like a small thing, it can become a big thing that can inhibit you from saving other places. So there's a lot of reasons to have it. I've heard some people say that it's not as necessary as some people make it sound because, your money doesn't make as much, but that's not really the point. And I could make that same argument about having life insurance, be like, oh, it's a low probability event. You could make more money if you just invested the premium, but that's not the point. You're protecting yourself against, higher impact, lower probability kind of events, but it's still good to have to just make sure it keeps you on the right track.
Yeah. The other thing to kind of toss in here is you mentioned kind of liquid. So high yield savings accounts typically are great for emergency funds. You could also take a look at laddering where rates are today, kind of the shorter duration CDs. 3-6 months. That way you can just ladder some. That way you always have money come and due. And if you needed to rip the money out of one of those CDs, you're just going to get charged a certain amount of interest. So that's a couple of great vehicles for liquid money. Should a retiree keep an emergency fund, Graham? I'm kind of throwing you on the spot. This wasn't in our notes we talked about.
Here's what I tell the retirees that I work with. I don't think that you need a 3 to 6 month one. I think you need however much makes you feel comfortable, as long as your plan allows that. So some people, what I tell them is I just say, hey, you know what? Just pick a number. If that number is 10,000, if it's 20,000, if it's 50,000, that's okay. But we're going to keep that much in a savings account so you feel okay. And then anything on top of that, just reinvest it. And if it goes below that, you can backfill it. But I think people can sometimes, stockpile too big of an emergency fund in retirement because you don't really, all your money's probably liquid at that point as long as you're over 60. And so you probably don't really need the liquidity so much, but for comfortability, I would say that it really depends person to person.
100% is exactly the way I feel. So you can tell you've worked at the firm for a little bit. So retirees have a lot of emotions that go through their brains as they go off into retirement. They turn off the faucet of income, as we like to call it. And next thing you know, they don't have the income coming in and they want to know that they have some money safe. So to your point, I don't know that there is a 3 to 6 months. It's more of one, how much do I need to help me sleep at night? Or what if I have an HVAC go out? I think the average cost of an HVAC in Alabama right now is between $7,000 and $10,000. What if I don't have a hailstorm and I have to replace my roof? What does that cost? And so do we need to keep that sort of thing liquid or try to plan for those types of things? I'll put you on the spot here. You're in your early 20s. Do you have an emergency fund yourself? I know the answer, but I just want you to tell the listener.
I do. Yes. Okay. I have an emergency fund, and I don't keep, probably a full 6 months of expenses because, I try to stay fairly liquid, but I have other liquid things that probably get me to that point. But yes, I do keep more than enough to make sure that I never have to turn to a credit card or major financing if I have a big one-time expense, because I think that, like I mentioned before, those types of things can totally derail your savings plan if you have to refocus your attention to, other surprise debts.
You probably just won the hearts of every listener listening to the show that someone in their early 20s has a almost 6 months emergency fund. So congrats on that.
Excellent. Yes.
All right. So that's number one. Step number one. Step number two, we have on our list of order of operations here is to fund your 401k up to the match. Now, one thing I want to throw in here is remember that in 2026, if you make more than $145,000 of W-2 income, the match is going to go in as Roth. But what we're saying here is you want to at least fund up to the match. So if your company's matching 5%, you want to take advantage of that 5%. And then step number three is, and I'll hand it back over to Graham here, what we kind of feel like step number three would be, if you have this, would be to do what?
To go back to some of that debt, if you have it, and specifically high interest rate debt. And again, I think some people might even make the argument of doing this before the 401k match, but with that 401k match, you're giving away free money. That's, basically a 100% return for whatever you put in to the match. So you got to get that done. But once that is finished off, the high interest rate debt is something you have to look back to. So I would say that, like, my general rule of thumb on that is if it's debt, shorter term loans that are over, 5 to 6%. I think that's when you have to start really looking at it. If you have a car payment that's 2%, maybe I'm not necessarily talking about that. Or if you have, a small
or credit card.
Yeah.
27%, 30%.
Yeah. If you have a credit card like that, you have to turn back to that immediately. I mean, I've seen current clients that, have had a little bit of credit card debt build up in a $5,000 to $10,000 range, and look at the statements and the APR is 21, 24%. So you got to take care of that, because obviously you're not going to beat that investing. And that's just going to endlessly compound if you make minimum payments. So you got to get that off the books next. So, but I think that this is one of those times where it's helpful to talk to an advisor about how to go about doing that, because there's different strategies. Obviously, I think Snowball is kind of the most popular of either tackling the highest interest rate or the lowest balance. Yeah. I'm kind of a fan of the highest interest rate because, again, as much as things dropping off balance is a nice feeling to have, mathematically getting the highest interest rate off the payroll quickest is going to save you the most money in the long term. But I think everybody's situation is a little bit different. It depends what kind of debt you have. Is it fixed? Is it variable? Is it credit card? What's the interest rate? But I do think that if you have, that high interest rate debt, 5-7% over that, you do need to start turning your attention back there a little bit, maybe before you do a ton more investing. Yeah.
According to several sources right now online, I was just, as you were talking, just kind of pulling this up, the average credit card rate right now, our interest rate's about 24.2%.
Yeah.
So, and then to your point of, do I pay off the high interest first, or do I do the, the Dave Ramsey snowball of the low payment and then snowball it upwards? At the end of the day, just pay the debt off. That's really how you do that. Obviously, we think there's a mathematical way, but then there's also that psychological, because money is very psychological with a lot of people, including myself. So sometimes getting those wins of, hey, I paid off this $1,000 credit card bill, and now I'm going to snowball this up to my $2,000. At the end of the day, just work on a plan to kind of pay the debt off. We think is probably the most important thing to do. What about a house, though? So let's say we own a house. A lot of people say pay that house off. You want to work to pay the house off. Let's say your interest rate is less than 4%. Would you be paying extra towards your house, or do we think we ought to go a different direction into step 4 at that point?
I think the only thing that I would do if it were me, and I'm not saying this is the right answer for everyone, but myself personally, if I had a 30-year mortgage at 4.3%, I would probably just make biweekly payments instead of monthly to get that extra payment in every year. And, that I think that mathematically already shortens your loan by 4 or 5 years, just right off the bat. Saves a good bit of money in interest. So I would probably start there. But to be honest, I wouldn't be throwing a ton extra at that, especially if you're a young person, because and I've told people this before, having a paid off house is great, but you're not going to probably go buy groceries with your home equity in retirement. So you do need to have assets other places. So if you spend 15 years just aggressively paying your house down and don't save anything outside of that, well, that's great. You might have a paid off house at the end of 15 years, but now you maybe only have another 15 or 20 years to retirement and don't have a ton more saved. And so you're kind of behind there. So I know that it would allow you to save a little bit more, and there's some arguments to be made there. But the time element of compounding
100%,
interest is
100%.
huge.
Mhm.
And if you're giving that up completely, I think people might end up really regretting that later in life.
A couple of things to think about too is there is a such thing as good debt and bad debt. And even owning your house, I wouldn't say is good debt, but it's better debt than, say, a credit card rate. And if it's a low interest rate debt, then I think you can take your money and invest other places and maybe create a little bit of an arbitrage on your money. The other things you can do, like Graham mentioned, is a biweekly payment system. That's essentially where you get in touch with your lender. Some lenders offer it, some don't. And basically you have your house payment drafted out every other week. Now, I like that because it sort of balances the payment a little bit. So you're not having, for example, $2,000 come out the first week of the month. Now you have like $1,000 first of the month, and around the middle of the month, you have another $1,000. So it kind of evens the flow of cash out in a lot of households. The other thing to think about is if you receive a large bonus. So let's say that you're working, you're in sales, all of a sudden you receive a $75,000 bonus from whatever job, then you could apply that lump sum towards principal, and then you could do what's called a recast. And then lastly, you could also refi in the future if need be. If your rates are around that 4.5%, you can often refi. So with the house, it's kind of it depends, kind of a situation. But moving on next to like step 4, we think that you should look at one or the other. And when we were talking pre-show, Graham, this is kind of where we get, it's like, okay, what do we do here? So we've got an HSA and Roth IRA kind of in the same line. The employer has to offer a high deductible health plan. So I think a lot of confusion centered around this HSA and high deductible health plan is you may have a health plan that has a high deductible, but it doesn't qualify to work with an HSA.
Not HSA eligible,
Exactly.
but high deductible. It's weird.
And I've seen where I've seen plans where they have what should be considered a high deductible health plan from an eligibility, but it's not. It's not eligible to kind of be paired with an HSA. So your employer has to offer that. The other thing is the Roth IRA. So step 1 is build emergency fund. 2 is fund the 401k up to the match. 3 is pay off high interest earning debt. We talked about the HSA a little bit, and now Roth IRA. So, do we put the Roth ahead of the HSA? Well, it depends. They both do a lot of really good things, but you have to have a modified adjusted gross income low enough in order to be contributing to an outside Roth. What I like about the Roth is you can always access your contributions if you need them without penalty. So let's say that you didn't quite have a 3-month emergency fund, but you had some extra money in your Roth IRA. Because you can access those principal or those contributions, then that sort of acts like a little bit of an emergency fund as well. And the other thing to note on the HSAs that I made notes about here is at age 65, you can actually spend the HSA for anything at that point. So what I do with mine personally, and people that have talked to me know exactly how I feel, and my wife, it drives her nuts, and they've heard the story. We have an HSA and we get a doctor bill. Say I went to, I don't know, maybe I had a cough or something, want to go to the doctor. I don't always pay that out of my HSA. I just pay it out of my pocket, and I just continue to let my HSA roll up because I want my HSA balance to grow large so that when I get to retirement, I have a way to fund long-term care. My dad had some dental work. It was nearly $20,000. Things are just expensive healthcare-wise in retirement. So I want to have a larger HSA balance to have the HSA pay for all that type of stuff in retirement. So I don't actually spend mine. I basically just let it continue to grow there. But back to the point I was trying to make is, if you don't use it for qualified medical expenses at age 65, then you just pay your ordinary income tax like an IRA. So it's kind of like having an extra IRA if you want to look at it that way, but you also have your health account, your health savings account for medical there also, all in one. They are what I call triple tax advantage. So they go in tax deferred. So they lower your gross income, which lowers your tax rate. It grows tax deferred while it's in the HSA. And if you use it correctly and use it for qualified medical expenses, it comes out tax free. When we talk about HSAs, there's a lot of confusion. HSAs and FSAs. FSA is generally the one you have to spend at the end of the year, and the account has to be empty. An HSA, you can continue to roll over and start to compound and build the balance inside of those plans. So on that step 4, it's kind of like they're both really good, right? They're both really good. So, but anyway, that's kind of our step 4 there. What about step 5? So we do our 401k, we pay off our debt, we've got our HSA and our Roth going on. What do we do next?
So I think the next thing I would do, and that we kind of talked about, is going back to the employer plan now to get it maxed out. So obviously we got the match in. That was step number 2. But the match is very seldom, probably never the maximum you can put in. Most matches are 3 to 5%. Occasionally you'll see a really good one at 8 or 10%. But at this point, that's when you go back to get that max in. So, if you're below age 50, that's 23.5. And then if you're over, you get that extra 7,500 catch up. Mm-hmm. So you could get up to 31,000 if you're over 50 in there. So you're doing the match. You want to get to the maximum. And really quick, I'll just mention, because some people might say, well, why wouldn't I do this before I do the Roth IRA? Because I could contribute Roth in the 401k. And you could. I think I have a few preferences to the Roth IRA. Obviously, one, like you talked about, Chris, pulling out the contributions. Roth 401k is totally pro rata on withdrawals. So as far as I understand, with most plans, there really isn't a way to pull just your contributions back if you need them. And again, you probably shouldn't be doing that a whole lot with your Roth IRA, but it is an option afforded to you. Also, 401ks, and this is not me talking bad about 401ks, but some of them have much higher fees than they need to have in them. And they're hidden fees. It's hard to know sometimes if what the plan administrator's charging, if, you're in really high cost mutual funds. I mean, I saw a 401k here recently a couple weeks ago, and, it was someone in a plan, and it was like all high cost mutual funds. And, their expense ratio was through the roof, but they weren't really getting any other assistance for that. They didn't have like an advisor that was helping them with anything. They were just kind of paying to be in the same funds that they could have gotten a bit cheaper. So that's those are a couple of reasons why my preference probably lies a little bit more with the Roth IRA before you go back to the 401k. But the 401k is still great. So
fund availability also.
Yeah, fund availability. I mean, when you're in the 401k, unless you have a broker link, you're kind of stuck with just
what's there.
Yeah, just what they offer. A lot of people go with life cycle funds, which those aren't bad, but sometimes they're not great either. Sometimes they can be a little higher cost. Sometimes they're overly conservative for people's ages. So I think that the flexibility of investing, you can invest in some individual stocks even in a Roth IRA, but generally just going low cost ETFs is much easier to do in a Roth IRA because you just have the whole wide open market. You can go buy whatever. So that's kind of the preference. But then when you're going back to that 401k, you have a lot of upward room of what you can save. So going from Roth IRA to 401k. And at that point, I mean, once you're getting both of those maxed out, you're really getting a lot in savings.
Yeah. A couple of things here, just because we may have some federal government employees like screaming at the radio right now. So the TSP does allow for a individual withdrawal. So let's say you wanted to withdraw money out of your TSP and move it to a Roth IRA. You can actually call in and specify, I want to move money or I want to withdraw directly from the Roth side of the TSP. There are a handful of employer plans that allow you to differentiate between Roth and pre-tax. It's not all of them, of course. So, but just kind of wanted to make that kind of known there.
Yeah. And I believe though, and it might depend on the plan documents, but that even if your 401k is 100% Roth, it's still a pro rata withdrawal of earnings and contributions with most plans, unless you rolled it over prior to doing a withdrawal, which, usually you can't do if you're in service. So again, I don't want people dipping into their Roth IRAs all the time and pulling out contributions anyway. So I wouldn't say that's like a primary advantage, but it is worth mentioning.
Yeah. The other thing too is when we talk about, we could go down a whole nother rabbit hole of if you're contributing to a Roth 401k and then doing so and not having a Roth IRA open and funded on the outside creates another 5-year rule that I'm looking at the clock here. We just don't have time to get into that, but maybe another show we can kind of dive back into that. But it's a rule that is often overlooked when it comes to contributions in a Roth 401k. So once we have the employer plan maxed out, 21% of plans out there today allow for what's called after-tax contributions. So let's say, for an example, and I can just say it because I know this plan offers it, but Boeing's plan offers after-tax. Lockheed Martin offers after-tax. So it is our opinion that once you've maxed out your employer plan, whether you do pre-tax or Roth in the 401k, if the 401k accepts after-tax contributions, then we should start looking at after-tax contributions. The reason that's important is that those after-tax contributions can later be rolled to a Roth IRA. So theoretically, you could be doing a Roth IRA on the outside. You could be doing some Roth in your 401k. A lot of people get confused. Oh, I'm doing Roth in my 401k. I can't do a Roth IRA contribution. Well, you can if your modified adjusted gross income is low enough. So now you've maxed out the 401k, and now you can put in these after-tax contributions. Well, those after-tax contributions can later be rolled to a Roth IRA. So typically in a 401k today, if you're under the age of 50, the most that can go into an employer plan between you and the employer is $70,000. If you're between ages of 50 and 59 and then 64 and above, it's $77,500. So again, that's between you and the employer. So that would be your contributions plus the match. And then if it accepts after-tax dollars. If you're between the ages of 60 and 63, now we got super catch-up. So if you're 60 to 63 today, the total they can go in is $81,250. So it's important to know those contribution limits and how this after-tax system works. So as a reminder, the growth on the after-tax the after-tax contribution. So you put, let's say, $20,000 of after-tax contributions into your employer plan. The growth on that falls under the traditional IRA rollover. So you may have put in $20,000 of after-tax money throughout your career. You can roll that to a Roth, and then the earnings on that $20,000, let's just say it was $3,200, that would have to go to a traditional IRA. So there's a lot that can happen and go on. If your plan has this, it's a super sweet perk if you have it. Mm-hmm. Only about 21% of plans in the U.S. have it. TSP, if you're a federal government employee, you can tune all of that out because the TSP does not offer that. Okay, so as we're about a minute away from wrapping up this first half of the show here, Graham, the last step in our process, once we've gone through all of those steps, where do we go?
That's when you kind of look back to the brokerage account on the outside. So after tax contributions on your own. And, I think that there's an argument to be made depending on your retirement timeline. You might do a little bit more here than some other places if you're trying to access money before 59 and a half for a significant amount of years. So it's a great type of account. There's a lot of tax advantages from charitable giving to withdrawals with capital gains brackets. However, usually it's kind of the last step because it's not a tax-free account and you don't get a tax deduction for putting money in. So it's still a great account, but, doesn't give quite as much benefit today as some of the other ones do.
Right. And I think just to kind of sum this up as we go to wrap this segment up here is I think you have Roth is your most favored money because you're going to pay taxes today and you're never going to pay taxes again. Probably the next most favorable would be this account right here, a TOD or a joint with rights or survivorship account. It falls under the capital gains rules. That's your next most favorable. And then obviously the least most favorable is the pre-tax money, your traditional 401k, your traditional IRA. So that's the first half of the show. If you're listening on the way to church, you can give us a call at 256-937-2010. And if you are wanting to catch the whole show, you can hop out to Apple Podcast platform, or you can pick us up on Spotify, the Rocket City Retirement Show.
If you're pondering the longevity of your retirement savings with questions like, is my nest egg sufficient? Or how long will my retirement funds last? Consider scheduling a session with Cris Wallace. Text VISIT to 256-937-2010. Again, text VISIT to 256-937-2010 now to set up your appointment.
Quarters, just 25 cents. That's hardly anything, right? But Cris Wallace and his team at WG Financial see quarters a little differently. A quarter is a lot when it's a quarter of your retirement savings. Now, do you want to pay 25% or more in taxes during your retirement? Well, Cris can create a plan to help address that. Now, if the only time you think about taxes is when you file them, you don't have a tax strategy. But it's not too late to get one with the help from Cris Wallace. So act now to make sure you're not paying a quarter, dime, or even a penny more than you should. Call Cris Wallace and his team at WG Financial at 256-937-2010 to schedule your personalized tax strategy session. A quarter saved is a quarter earned. Call 256-937-2010 now. That's 256-937-2010. Investment advisory services made available through AE Wealth Management, LLC, a registered investment advisor. Firm may not give tax advice.
With so many worries in life, market volatility shouldn't be on your list. Help ensure your retirement plan is stable and independent of market swings. Just get in touch with Cris Wallace at 256-937-2010. That's 256-937-2010 to start planning.
Again, you're listening to the Rocket City Retirement Show. So happy to have you along with us today. I'm Lou Ann Fulmer here with Cris Wallace and Graham Bauer, both of WG Financial Group. And again, that number to call, 256-937-2010. Call or text the word visit if you prefer to text. Our motto is plan, retire, and play. And we want you to be able to play in retirement. Find us online anytime at wgfinancialgroup.com. And remember, this show is available wherever you get your podcast, Spotify, Apple, wherever that is. Just search for the name of our show, Rocket City Retirement Show. All right, guys. So we are going to now get into just a little bit more of some details. Now, is this all part of the order of operations, or is this something new, the SEP versus solo K?
So this is something a little different. This is really, wanted to take a few minutes to kind of go over if you're self-employed, if you're a 1099, kind of working by yourself, sole proprietor, you have the ability to contribute to a retirement plan if you have earned income. So there's multiple things you can do. Obviously, traditional IRA is one, Roth IRA is one, but you also have really a more common vehicle called the SEP IRA. And then there's also what's called the solo 401k. And I want to just talk about the differences between both of those. Mm-hmm. And especially, if you're like self-employed, this is a great little segment for you to listen to, because I feel like we're going to provide some good data on why one is better than the other in some cases. So the SEP IRA just stands for Simplified Employee Pension. That's what SEP stands for. So if anybody's kind of wondering, well, what does SEP stand for? Well, there you go. All right. So let's kind of get into the differences between the two. So when it comes to a SEP, the reason why I think that most sole proprietors should use a solo 401k is because a SEP IRA has a limit. So the limit is 25% of your net self-employment income. So let's just say, for an example, that your net self-employment income was, say, $10,000. Well, you could only put in up to $2,500. But if you do a solo K, then you could actually put in the entire $10,000. So there's a much higher limit. The solo K follows if you were listening in segment 1. If not, I would encourage you to go back and check it out on the podcast platforms. We talked about the contribution limits for 401k. So 70,000, 77,500, 81,250. So you can put in a lot more in the solo K. So that is one big advantage there, because let's say, for an example, maybe you've got a husband who's doing a little side hustle and he makes $10,000 extra as a sole proprietor, but maybe his wife is making $250,000. So they're up in that 24 bracket. And they want to defer money. Well, if you have that SEP IRA, you can only defer up to $2,500 if we're using that 10,000 number again. But with a solo K, you could actually defer the full 10,000. And the other good thing about a solo K versus a 401k is it doesn't have to be payroll deduct. So you can actually fund it from your checking or savings once you know how much you're going to put in there, and once you know how much you're allowed to put in there. So contribution limits, we feel like if I'm comparing the SEP versus solo, I'm like solo K all the way, because I have a higher contribution potential.
Yeah, contribution limits to me in this conversation are probably the largest contributing factor to which one you choose. Because I mean, when you're talking about a self-employed person, just to give an example, let's say someone's self-employed, it's a single individual, and they make $75,000 a year, and they're only able to save really, $5,000 or $6,000 a year. Well, at that point, you might say, okay, well, maybe just do a Roth IRA. If you're not even getting over the Roth IRA limit in savings, then for now, maybe just do that for simplicity's sake, to not mix anything else up. But as you make more and as you need to defer more, that's where the conversation really gets, interesting. And I think, Chris, to your point, that I think that's a really good example, and an example that you see more and more nowadays of someone who, maybe the husband or the wife is an executive somewhere and they make a salary of $300,000, and then their spouse, runs kind of a side hustle business and
influencer.
Yeah.
Social
influencer
media.
And makes another $60,000, $70,000 a year. Where, you're right. With the SEP IRA, you could only get 25% of that in, where, you could get a whole lot of, you could pretty much defer all of it in, in a solo 401k. And, even if the other spouse helps, they can be on payroll and deduct a little bit of it into their 401k too. So the limits go really high there. And neither of them require, and I think we're going to get into this too, but overly complicated reporting requirements. But, I would say, maybe a slight mini drawback of the solo 401k is there is like one filing requirement for it.
Once you reach a certain balance.
Yeah, once you reach a certain balance. And it's not nearly as anything like having a normal 401k plan with a bunch of employees where there's like non-discrimination testing and all this stuff that, employers don't like having to do. So that's not really a factor in it, but there's a little bit more reporting there than the SEP, which is, pretty simple on the reporting side of things. But yeah, I think you kind of have to monitor like how much can I even save? Because if the number is lower than what 25% of a SEP contribution is, then I don't know, you could have the conversation about, for simplicity's sake, just doing one over the other. But, if you're trying to get more money deferred, if you're running a successful business, the solo K is going to let you defer a lot more. And I guess the one thing too to consider, and I assume we're getting to this too, but I guess we'll start now. The solo K is definitely even more, I would say, strict about the kind of employees that you can have. And basically you can't have any employees except you and your spouse. So when it says solo, it doesn't mean just one person. Technically, it can be you and your spouse. Yeah. That's, but that's as many people as you can have. As soon as you have another employee, that's, that goes kaput pretty much. And the SEP is still available, but then the testing for when you have to contribute to a SEP gets a little bit more complicated for the employees. So you have to think about that. So I would say it can be a fairly easy decision for a high earning, truly self-employed sole proprietor doesn't have any employees. I think that's a pretty easy decision to say, oh, I need to defer, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year. The solo K is probably going to be the way to go. But in different situations, they can make sense for different reasons.
Yeah. So a couple of things here that I want to note, because we're talking more about the self-employed. And Luann, I'm kind of looking at the clock here.
It's okay.
We're probably going to go this whole segment just on this right here.
Good stuff. It's okay.
Yeah, it's real good. So a couple things. One, Graham mentions you on a solo K is very strict. It's a solo K. So it is for a solo person. But in the case of a husband and wife, you can also use the spouse's, you can also use the solo K for the spouse, unless the spouse is an active participant in another plan and say he or she is maxing that plan out, then there is no room for the solo K at that point, because there are 401k limits. I don't care if you have 2 or 3 employers, there are still limits, annual limits that you can only contribute to. I won't dive down the rabbit hole of you can have a 401k and you can also have an outside SEP if they're two completely different businesses. I'm not even going to go there because that'll just kind of confuse the listener. And I feel like this is already deep enough. With self-employed individuals, here's what I run into with a lot of self-employed individuals. Everybody wants to itemize away everything. Okay, so there's a problem with that. Number one, you run a business to make money. Period. That's why you're in business. That's why you're running the business. So what I find is there are people that they want to itemize away all these things so they don't pay as much in taxes. Well, there's what's called below the line deduction. So that's your itemization. What, the car you watch on TikTok, if you buy this big vehicle, you can depreciate it and blah, 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 blah. That's itemization. A solo K or even a SEP IRA are above the line deductions. So they are literally dollar for dollar reducing your gross income. So I am much more in favor of an above the line deduction over an itemized deduction because they are not the same. A above the line, Graham, as you know, you've now passed your second leg of your EA exam at this point, is a dollar for dollar reduction in gross income. The itemization is not. So I think that's another advantage where I think what I'm trying to say is here, I think a self-employed person is so zoned in and focused on itemizing things away, and they could literally be shifting money from their right pocket to their left pocket, doing an above the line reduction from gross income if they use one of these, vehicles appropriately. On that $10,000 example, let's just kind of running the numbers here, just while you were talking a few minutes ago. If you do a SEP and you can only put in $2,500, that's about in the 24 bracket. That's about $600 in annual savings in federal income tax. But if you were able to defer all of that $10,000, it's a $2,400 federal tax savings because you can put more into the solo 401k. So it actually offers you a little bit more of a tax advantage if you're doing pre-tax. But here's the kicker. Since the Secure Act rules have come out, you can actually do Roth in a SEP. You can also do Roth in a solo K. So, for the people out there, it's like, I don't do any pre-tax, I want to do all Roth. Great. You can do Roth in a SEP and a solo K, and then still the SEP or the solo K would win out because you can put more Roth money, into the solo K. A couple other things to note here as we continue on talking about this is so the maximum amount that can go into a SEP IRA in 2025, this is the max, $70,000. But because the solo K falls up under the 401k rules, there's catch up. There is no catch up with the SEP IRA. So with the solo K, you got the 70,000, 77,500, 70 or 81,250, all of those I just mentioned a few minutes ago. So there is no extra catch up. So here again, from a contribution standpoint, the maximum amount you can put in, solo K wins out big time. Graham, you talked about the filing. I think it's $250,000. If the balance gets above $250,000, you have to file Form 5500, I believe it is. The other key thing to note here too is, so if you're under age 59 and a half, 401k plans have a loan provision in most all of those. And so you can borrow, which is up to $50,000 or 50% of the balance, whichever is less. Well, with a solo K, you can borrow against your solo K, just like you could your employer plan. You can't do that with a SEP IRA. It's a 10% penalty if you pull out early of the SEP IRA. So just another advantage there from a solo K versus SEP IRA perspective. So anything else to add on any of those, Graham? We covered a lot of information on those.
Yeah. I think, it's just one other thing I'll kind of mention here is we're talking about a lot of self-employed individuals here, sole proprietors. And, that includes most of the time, independent contractors, which I think maybe kind of goes without saying. But some people, especially, in the northern Alabama area, with there being so much contract work out there, there is a lot of people who maybe wouldn't consider themselves business owners necessarily, but do work as independent contractors where they're just given the 1099, non-employee, the NEC, and, don't have access to a 401k plan, don't get their health care through their work. And these same things are generally going to apply to these people as well. So, there's obviously benefits to being an employee, but, having a little business on the side too can also afford, a whole lot more savings towards your retirement. So, yeah, I think, and one other thing I'll add just about your comment on itemization versus above the line deductions too, especially retirement plan. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And in getting this deduction, different from an itemized deduction, you are saving money towards your retirement as well. 100%. So you're really killing two birds with one stone
100%.
Here, rather than, just taking a deduction on maybe a big piece of machinery you don't need really or something like that.
Right pocket to left pocket.
Yeah.
Moving money from right pocket to left pocket. And you can do Roth.
Yeah. So, and into an appreciating asset too, like you're not taking depreciation on something that genuinely is depreciating for, most of the time if it's a car or something like that. So yeah, you're totally right. Right pocket to left pocket. It's just a better way to go for most people. And I would say it's underutilized.
Way underutilized.
Generally.
Way underutilized, because the SEP is just much more widely known as the self-employment plan,
Mm-hmm.
So the other thing in that conversation with people that I've met with throughout my career is they buy equipment just to be able to deduct it. And I'm thinking, why are you not, maybe looking at employing your wife to do the books or something like that and pay her a reasonable salary? And then you've got two different people you could do retirement plan contributions for. I mean, I think the focus, kind of back to our topic here, is so much focused on the deductibility of all these different things that I can itemize. And they're not thinking about, how do I, reduce my taxes using my own personal retirement plan and really paying myself first, instead of putting it on a piece of equipment that I'm going to depreciate over time. So,
yeah. And this gets even a little outside of our topic, but while we're talking about it, I mean, as far as deducting away all of your income too, I mean, there's, I think, plenty of reasons not to do that. But another one that we didn't mention today, but we've mentioned before, is it is good to pay into Social Security some. Like, you don't want to not pay into Social Security at all. I know
you're getting the finger from a lot of people out there listening to the show right now.
I know, but see, here's the thing. I hear this all the time, and mathematically I agree, but I also don't agree. When people are like, oh, if you're not paying into Social Security, I could have taken that money and invested it elsewhere and probably made more. That is probably correct. However, you would not have done that. And that's the fact. And almost no one, I think, is disciplined enough to do that their entire life. Right. And if you could have, that would have been great. But the people we've seen, it's generally just pastors, I think, that were able to do that for a time. And we've run into a few of them. And I think we've yet to see one that did that, took the savings and invested it properly. Usually it ends up being, somewhat of a dire situation because that source of retirement income is gone. So if you don't have a pension or anything else on top of that, then, you better hope that you really saved all of that your entire life. So, it's sort of similar to even the 401k plans with the match nowadays, where you just get like automatically enrolled by a lot of employers. Again, sometimes it's good to have your hand held a little bit when it comes to saving money, because we're just, as humans, I don't believe we're disciplined enough to do that on our own, at least not consistently and with everything that comes up in life. So yeah, you want to pay in some. I understand that you might not, you could make the argument about how that looks with structuring your distributions and everything, but you don't want to show zero on your Social Security earnings every year till retirement and not be reinvesting that money.
No, it's actually a really good point. So the couple that we run into, you're right, they have been pastors. I think you were sitting in one of the meetings, and the gentleman had that was what he was going to do. He was going to opt out. He was going to take that 6.2 and he was going to invest it. And he said he did it for a little while, but then life got in the way. So family things happened. He needed extra money. And now, you talk about the hand holding, the automatic deduction wasn't happening. That extra 6.2 was coming into his account. He had access to it and he ended up spending it. The other problem with opting out of Social Security is you lose the ability to go on disability, from Social Security. You lose Medicare coverage when you reach age 65. So this particular individual that we met with, it's been several years ago now, big problem for him. The other person that I can distinctly remember opted out, but then opted back in. And I don't remember without looking it up online, but at one point you were able to opt back in, thank goodness. And this individual did, but then his Social Security payment was a lot less. So he ended up making a lot less in Social Security. So I think the intention, kind of to your point, Graham, is okay, well, I'll just do this and I can do better than what the government does. Well, I 100% agree. But if we dig a little deeper in just investors themselves and their inability to keep their hands out of the cookie jar and handle their investments like a bar of soap, and the investment account really never gets any larger, in some cases gets smaller, because now like, okay, you've opted out of Social Security if you chose to do that. You're like, I got to maximize this, and I can't take any losses. And then all of a sudden you start losing the ability to stay in the market long term, because now all of a sudden you feel like you've got to watch that 6.2%. And ultimately, investors make worse decisions because they make emotional decisions versus working with an advisor, where study after study shows that net return with an advisor is always a little higher than just the main investor themselves. So one other thing on Social Security, since we're talking about Social Security, and we talk about Social Security a lot on the show, when you go get your statement from SSA, so I think it's age 60, Graham, maybe you can look that up real quick just while we're talking here, but under a certain age, you don't get the paper mailed to you anymore. But you can always go to ssa.gov, create an account, and you can always download your statement. So even if you're 45 years old and you haven't thought about Social Security, or you think it's going to be, not there or different, that's fine. Whatever. You're entitled to think that, no problem. But still go to ssa.gov and make sure that your statement is reflecting what is on your return in terms of income. Because, on the back of the Social Security form, if there's like some 0 years, you want to get those fixed because they're going into the calculation for your Social Security payment. So just do a randomized check every couple of years on your Social Security statement, just in case you're younger. Just in the event there were to be an error, you want to fix that now, because what you don't want to do is you don't want to be sitting in my meeting room at age 67 ready to collect your Social Security, and I flip it over and go, wow, you got some zeros there that we really need to fix. And now you got to get those fixed, and you're trying to retire, and you got to wait on Social Security to fix that, which I don't know if they'll fix that first or Jesus will come back first.
Right.
But you just don't know, right? So just be checking that out. So, Luann, we've got looks like about 8 minutes left in the show. I know you had some other questions on some large IRA stuff. I'd like to try to get into that. This has just been good topics to get into. So I'm really glad we took the time and went through this today.
I think that was very interesting for so many people, self-employed. So many people are. So let me go ahead and get your phone number in again at this point. 256-937-2010 is the phone number. If anything that Chris and Graham have talked about today have brought up some questions, with you or your family or whatever, give them a call. It is complimentary. Call or text the word visit 256-937-2010. And remember the website, wgfinancialgroup.com. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us this weekend. This is the Rocket City Retirement Show, and I'm Lou Ann Fulmer. All right. So many of us have our retirement savings in things like a tax-deferred retirement account, okay? So we're just going to kind of continue this discussion. There have been some new rules as far as the retirement planning rules that have changed, and I want to get into that because they don't just impact retirees, but also future generations who stand to inherit accounts. And these are changes from the Secure Act and Secure Act 2.0. So go ahead, Chris, I want to get your reaction.
Yeah, so there's the legacy aspect has really changed things. So obviously, at the tail end of 2019, I believe was when the Secure Act 1 went into effect. It basically got rid of that stretch IRA, and now most people know and they're well aware. There's like for a non-spouse beneficiary, and there's some other exceptions here, but by and large, non-spouse beneficiaries like your kids, they're going to have 10 years to pay the tax on it. That's not a lot of time. So like if they inherit a $1 million IRA at, I don't know, age 55 in their peak earning years, making say $200,000 a year, and then they got to pay taxes on that $1 million over 10 years, and let's say they're taking it out at $100,000 a year just to kind of get it out of there by the end of the 10th year. That's a pretty good tax rate or tax bracket they're probably going to go up in. So, it does put a little bit more. It helps the retiree out. It doesn't help the beneficiary out. And that's really the bottom line. And this is kind of like gospel according to Chris. And I'd be anxious to hear your opinion as well, Graham. When Congress did this, the largest group of people in the United States today that have the most money is the baby boomer. And what typically was happening is most of them wouldn't spend down their entire IRA and they die with it. And then it passes on to the kids, and the kids could then stretch it out over their life expectancy. So I personally believe Congress got a little bit smart and said, hey, there's a ton of money in pre-tax. The Roth IRA came on board sometime in the late 1990s. The Roth 401k came on board in the 2006 timeframe, not a lot of people have a ton of money in Roth. There's a lot more money in pre-tax. So Congress probably got together and said, hey, a lot of these people are going to be passing away soon. These kids are going to get it. We need to tax the kids. Yeah. Oh, but by the way, we'll give the retiree a little bit of a break. We'll move the RMD age out to 73 so they won't really gripe. They'll be happy. And if you're born in 1960 or later, it'll be 75. So we'll make it so they can defer it a little bit longer. But as soon as they die, the clock starts ticking on that 10 years, and we're going to get our money that way from the beneficiary. That's kind of a hypothetical, funny way for me, the way I think Congress
I think that was it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that maybe it's kind of a pseudo estate tax in some way, shape, or form, because obviously the estate tax limit is insanely high right now. You know, you got to have an estate worth over like 27 million if you're married to, you know, be facing any gift or estate taxes. So that doesn't apply to many people at all. But, you know, having a lot of pre-tax money, that's pretty common because, to your point, Roth hasn't been available for a super long time. And by the time it was available, a lot of baby boomers were pretty high income earners as well that needed to defer some more income. So I think that, you know, that's probably a way to collect revenue. I wonder if it also maybe just from a practical standpoint made a little sense that you didn't have all these inherited IRAs.
Triple inherited IRAs.
Yeah, because, you know, it could get really messy if everyone's just taking distributions over their life expectancy and you're like, we don't even know whose this was to begin with. This passed to Jim and then his niece and then her daughter and then her cousin. And you're just like, whose even was this? Who made the contribution? Yeah. So it might have something to do with that too. But I do think the IRS is going to get theirs probably in 15 or 20 years. But the thing is, and here's what I talk to people about a lot. It's like, you might not care because you're not going to be around to see it. So I can sympathize with that. But if you just don't want the government getting more of your assets dead or alive, then, you know, you might need to consider some alternative strategies. But, you know, I think a lot of people take the viewpoint of, well, I'm going to be dead. Like, who cares if my kids have to pay taxes on their inheritance?
That's my view.
I'm fine with that answer. Yeah. But, you know, at the same time, if you really, really don't want Uncle Sam, you know, reaching into your retirement savings, you know, they'll get theirs eventually, even if it's, you know, not in your lifetime.
Yeah. Here's another thought, too, as we kind of come near the end of the show. So we talked about what Congress, you know, if I'm in Congress, that's what I'm thinking. Go ahead and push out the RMD age, make the retiree happy today, but then we're going to penalize the kids. But then it could also be, I push the retirement age out to 73 and 75 for RMDs. If I push that out, not only do they get to defer it a little bit longer, but it also opens up the window a little bit longer for Roth conversions. Mm-hmm. And if we convert to Roth today and we leave the tax brackets a little bit lower for a little bit longer, then we, the government, I'm pretending I'm in the government. Don't hate me. I'm trying to put myself in their shoes. It's really hard to do because those shoes are really small to fill and my feet don't fit. So anyway, the Roth conversions gives government tax money today. So it's kind of, they win and you win in some cases. Like, we're big advocates for Roth conversions if you're in the right bracket. Of course, we are all about taking advantage of what we call the free Roth conversion. That's available for some people if you have Social Security income only. But then also in that 12% bracket, if you're in that 12 or that low 22 bracket, we think it starts to make a lot of sense to start looking at conversions and retirement. So, Luann, we are done. Full hour of the show again. Really jammed packed show full of good material. Always appreciate you being here, Graham. Sure. Always appreciate you being here and the listeners. I'll give our number out, 256-937-2010. If you want to come in and talk about retirement planning, you can tell we're kind of a couple of CFP nerds and like to get into this kind of stuff. But if you want to come in and talk about your retirement planning, feel free to do so. Give us a call. Discovery session is 256-937-2010. Hope everybody has an awesome and blessed week. And remember to serve every person in every situation with a servant heart.
A Roth conversion is a taxable event and may have several tax-related consequences. Be sure to consult with a qualified tax advisor before making any decisions regarding your IRA.
Investment advisory products and services made available through AE Wealth Management, LLC, a registered investment advisor. Insurance products are offered through the insurance business WG Insurance Services. WG Financial Group is an investment advisory practice that offers products and services through AE Wealth Management, LLC, a registered investment advisor. AEWM does not offer insurance products. The insurance products offered by WG Insurance Services services are not subject to investment advisor requirements. AWM and WG Insurance Services are not affiliated companies. Investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal. Any references to protection, safety, or lifetime income generally refer to fixed insurance products, never securities or investments. Insurance guarantees are backed by the financial strength and claims-paying abilities of the issuing carrier. This radio show is intended for informational purposes only. It is not intended to be used as the sole basis for financial decisions, nor should it be construed as advice designed to meet the particular needs of an individual's situation. WG Financial Group is not permitted to offer, and no statement made during this show shall constitute tax or legal advice. Our firm is not affiliated with or endorsed by the U.S. government or any governmental agency. The information and opinions contained herein provided by third parties have been obtained from sources believed to be reliable, but accuracy and completeness cannot be guaranteed by WG Financial Group. This radio show is a paid placement.